Hello. Good afternoon and welcome everyone. I have the absolute pleasure to be in conversation with Akwugo Emejulu and Dominique Haensell. We will discuss topics that affect women of color, from intersectionality and post-colonialism to activism for justice. Both Akwugo and Dominique are passionate readers, drawing inspiration from works of fiction. The conversation will explore questions like, what significance do novels have for their theoretical work? Which books have particularly inspired their feminist thinking? What kind of literature really brings about social change? Please let me introduce our guests. Akwugo is chair of sociological studies at the University of Sheffield. Before entering academia, she worked as a community organizer, trade union organizer, and participatory action researcher. As a political sociologist, she has research interests in two areas: racial, gender, and class inequalities in Europe, and women of color's intersectional activism for justice. Dominique Haensell, born in 1986 in London, showed diverse interests from a young age. During her childhood in Nuremberg, she founded a detective club cum bicycle gang, Die Bande, and a newspaper, Der Vorsi Bota, and even hosted a lively one-woman music show on a cassette, Dommy's Pop Show. Very impressive. After completing high school in Darmstadt, she studied literary studies and English at the Freie Universität Berlin and critical methodologies at King's College London. Today, Dominique holds a PhD in literary studies and continues to pursue a wide range of interests. Since 2011, she has written for Missy Magazine, and since March 2020, she has served as the acting editor-in-chief. Thank you both for being here. I have taken part in many panels as a guest and as a moderator, so I want to acknowledge the fact that we are here as three diverse Black women having this conversation. I had the privilege of growing up in 3 different countries, and English was my third language, one that I immediately clung on to. My education into this new world was watered through my voracious reading. I clung to English because I saw my freedom and potential discovery of who I was without the watchful eyes of my homogeneous culture and upbringing. It would not be until in my 20s at university where I suddenly had access to a diverse array of authors and books, and I could freely curate who and what I read. That was when I really started to reflect on that restrictive and limited reading education that has been my foundation. I would like to read the opening page of your book, Akwugo, Fugitive Feminism. I first read No Humans Involved, an open letter to my colleagues by Jamaican writer and theorist Sylvia Wynter in the late 2000s. Since then, I haven't been able to stop thinking about her main proposition that the human is an exclusive and excluding category bounded by whiteness, and that the ability to receive care and solidarity is limited only to those identified and recognized as human. Wynter asks us to consider who is included in this humanity and the implications for all our lives. When I read this passage, I recalled the danger of the reading foundation I was given as a child. And I say danger, as that is what for years and years informed who I was, how I saw myself, my place in society, and so on. My reading education was a no humans involved one, as I never saw myself or my humanity in those pages and all the implications that later followed pursuit. My question for the both of you is, how was your personal history of reading as a child? And when did you realize how influential, whether in detriment or betterment, it was to your own personhood?
Well, thank you, Lubi, for that wonderful introduction and a great question, right? We're getting right into it. All right. in terms of my personal reading history, so I came from a reading household. My mother was an English and French teacher, and we always had books in the house. And one of my fondest memories is watching my mother read and struggle with William Faulkner, Toni Morrison, Robert Hayden, and because she was teaching that to her students in high school and junior high school. And so my personal reading history was was shaped mostly by my mother and grandmother, and the importance of grounding me in what has now become the great American canon. And I think that there was a meme or something going around that there were like more books about boys with dogs than there were about black women or something, you know what I mean? It's like, remember, what was it, the Great Journey? There's like some boy with his weird golden retrievers getting lost in Alaska or something. So, and there were always like these books about, one man and his dog. And so I read a lot of those. But I also remember reading Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. I remember being read to, it actually was a picture book, The Snowy Day. So there were a number of things, but I was absolutely shaped by the American canon. And I remember that my mom was really insistent that I read, is it London's White Fang? Do you remember White Fang and, about the Huskies and stuff? Yeah, I know, more dogs, but yet no, always with the dogs. But anyways. So, but I don't know if I guess because I'm a little bit older than the both of you. And so I kind of came of age where I don't know if I expected to see myself in the literature I was reading. And certainly I know that in thinking about universal themes, universal ideas, part of my training and something I've had to rethink and re-educate myself about is why I did not expect to see myself, right? And I had to kind of find a place within Jack London's work to be able to see how I resonated with it. So I don't know. I don't know if I would say that my reading foundation was necessarily dangerous in terms of a self-erasure, but certainly I have never come to books thinking to see myself, because I'm always more interested in trying to explore the world through another person's eyes. So.
Thank you. Dominique?
Yeah, thank you. It's a very deep question. Well, for me, it was very much a question of language as well, because I grew up in Germany with my white German mother. And so my mom is a very voracious reader too, more for pleasure. I think I never saw her like struggling with like hard literature in that sense. But she did, there was like a sense of joy and joyful reading. She's also a teacher, English, German, and she has great knowledge also she had great knowledge of diasporic literature that she wouldn't call that, but she read Mariam Abba or Maurice Condé, so those were names. But mostly, in terms of children's books, we were traveling to London to visit my dad and see my family regularly, and we would get books from there. And for me, it was always that elsewhere where I would like find myself, sort of finally have like a children's book with, kids who looked like me. So I never even thought I'd find something in that language that I grew up in or was surrounded in and read in mostly. I read mostly German until like a certain point, I think, in my teenage years. And then even studying, I felt like I studied English and not Germanistic for many, many reasons. But even, and then all the way up to my PhD life, I felt like I needed to go elsewhere. I needed this other space, this diasporic space that was Anglophone for me. And only in my early 20s did I read Black German authors. Only in my early 20s did I find out about Maya Yim. And that was, and still is shocking to me that I had to go basically all around the world to find something, and then find something at home that was there, but was just, and even still is completely overlooked and not part of any curriculum.
Yeah, that, when you said that you didn't expect to find yourself, I think that's part of it. And the reason why I use the word danger is it is actually because you're never, we're not part of this canon, right? And we, as you found your kind of way, you found your stories in the lens of other people. I was also the same. But I think it's extremely important to have diverse voices for children from a very young age, you know? And both of you had both readers at home, and obviously your canon was quite varied than most of ours. My mother also read for pleasure. But I was left to my own devices to find out what books to read. So thank you for that. What book made you aware of feminism, and how far did you have to peel that layer to get to Black feminism?
Well, I already know, because this is a story I think I tell in my book about how when I was at university, so I studied political science at university, and those of you who study, or students, or studying political science, you know that it's a kind of white male-dominated field, and you only read two women, you know, Hannah Arendt, and mostly just Hannah Arendt, right? So like there's, you know, so the canon is very exhausting, and you're like, oh God, not these people, Rousseau talking to me about freedom, oh my God. And I remember, I was like, it doesn't seem right that I've read one woman and no Black people, and certainly no Black women. I was like, there's something not quite right. And I remember my professor was like, it's fine, there's no problem here. And so I decided to sign up for an African American literature class. And I remember we read Alice Walker's The Color Purple. That was the first book we read. And I was so mad. Because I was like, I knew it, damn it. Because, you know, this is a book about queerness, it's about feminism, it's about self-reinvention. It's a philosophy book that rivals Hegel, right? Yes, I said it. Or Your Great Man, yes. So, and I think for me, that was the start of something, that you could really think back and read with, through a counter-narrative, these key stories, right? And so this it was, you know, this kind of classic African-American literature class that we read from the 19th to then, I think I was still the 20th century when I was at university. Oh, I'm so old. I know. So, and we did this survey, and I remember reading at the same time many of the key Enlightenment thinkers, and thinking and using my literature class to fill in the gaps, or to read against what I was being told about freedom, equality, and all the rest of it, because Toni Morrison, Octavia Butler, Alice Walker had very different things to say about that, about who's included in humanity, and who gets to enjoy the fruits of democracy. And so Alice Walker really unlocked that for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
The first explicitly feminist. So I think I was lucky, again, because I studied English philology, and the way that, you know, that can encompass many diasporic countries and areas as well, meant that I was able to take a class on contemporary African literatures, which was, yeah, basically an introduction for me. And so formative. Also, that instructor, shout out to Mr. Makocha, really changed my life. And it was very much like a solitary experience of finding out that I was a feminist, because I was researching for a paper on a short story, I think Doreen Bangana, and I was looking for literature on. So the protagonist is like she's a mistress, actually. So I think it's. There's like a company, a white contracting company in Uganda, and she kind of like, she becomes the mistress of one guy there. And you know, and it's not a clear-cut situation, because there are certain benefits that she enjoys, and it wasn't slut-shamey or anything, but I didn't have the words for that. So I was like, oh, what's going on here? And I actually read an academic, just a paper on the waves of feminism. And I mean, it was 2007 or something, and I'd come up in a society where feminism wasn't, you know, that was back then, people didn't call themselves a feminist. They were very kind of stereotypical ideas, you know, a lot of Latzhose and that kind of stuff. You know, it felt very removed. You know, not to say that my mom didn't think of herself as feminist, but the identity of a feminist wasn't something people claimed for themselves, a generational thing. So I read about the waves, different waves of feminism, And I was like, oh, wow, I'm a third wave feminist. Oh, that's what I am. So that was really exciting, and it really just happened alone in my room, which kind of brings me to the next formative text, and it was actually Wolf, A Room of One's Own. I mean, I spent like a lot of time with that text also for another paper, and I love that text. I love Wolf, but also a very problematic figure that that I had to learn or unlearn later. I mean, there were like raving anti-Semitic and racist entries in her diaries, like really, really just garish and terrible. Still, there is something there for me as a feminist in her writing, still.
Very poignant that you said it was a solitary affair, which I think a lot of us can relate to. And also the other point that both of you came into it in university or later in your life. And again, this goes back to the whole why we need diverse publishing starting from, when we're children. So which brings me to the German publishing canon and the access to diverse literature, specifically when it comes to Black storytelling and voices. Black authors have been heavily underrepresented in the German literary scene and publishing. While there are some independent verlags who are publishing Black authors, in the traditional publishing houses, there is too little to count. In addition, German publishing is known, compared to its neighbors, for having a high translation rate, meaning many books are being published from other languages, notably English, into German. But when it comes to Black authors, I have seen that if German publishing houses publish Black authors, they publish more in translation than works by Afro-Germans and Black Germans living in the country, which goes back to my old adage that civil rights is erased from the German language and therefore needs to be borrowed from America or England. Akwugo, you were recently published by ReReclaim Verlag in translation for your book Fugitive Feminism, which is groundbreaking considering how traditional they are. I think your book is extremely important, and yet at the same time I see the erasure of Afro-German and Black German writers who get far less chances in comparison to talk and write about Black feminism or topics concerning them. Both perspectives should be published. Dominique, as an Afro-German, have you seen and experienced this way of German publishing that makes only one space because we are seen as one? And Akwugo, have you noticed this in your publishing career as well?
Yeah, thank you. I love that you said reclaim, because the German translation is ReReclaim, but I think that is very telling that let's just call it reclaim, at least for this small moment, historical moment in time, exactly. No, reclaim, we can go into the whole history of what that represents. It's a very kind of identity-forming bourgeois thing in Germany and in German publishing. And I do find it quite interesting that that they have translated Akwugo's book, which is amazing, absolutely. But there is still no ReReclaim edition of Mayayim again. So, but I found it very interesting when I did my PhD, and I did it on Anglophone, Afro-diasporic literatures, and I traveled to the US and I went to different conferences, and then people were like, "Oh, are you working on Afro-German literature?" And I had to go to the US to find scholars who were seriously engaged with Afro-German literature, and a lot of them. There are conferences there. The whole topic had to be again, it was outsourced in this weird way. I think there's a case to make for the whole of Germanistic, that German studies elsewhere is a lot more open, a lot more engaged with what they still call so-called minority literatures in Germany. Well, in Germany, they would call minorities literature. In the different fields of German studies, it's Turkish, German, and so forth. And the scholarship there is excellent. The scholarship in German is non-existent because, we are now seeing in publishing, in mainstream publishing, we're seeing a small change, but it took a long time, and it's still not canonized in a way it should be. And the scholarship on it is, but I don't want to. There are some scholars who have actually, German scholars who've now published, Afro-German scholars who've now published really, really great books on Afro-German literature. So it's happening, but it's embarrassing that it had to happen in the US first, as with many discourses.
Yes, part of the problem of talking about blackness in Europe is most Europeans think about this as a horrifying problem imported from America. If only this would stay in America. So the issue of racism and anti-racism is seen as an inconvenient American import that has nothing to do with Europe and Europeanness. And so that has lots of intended and unintended consequences. The first being that when we think about Black feminism, more often than not, we're thinking about the African-American variety of Black feminism. And so, and part of that is because America is a superpower, and even though Black Americans are a oppressed group within America, our voice carries simply because of we are also part of the superpower. So for Black American feminism, we are in this deeply ambivalent space of seeking to write against the colonial power, write against capitalism, write against patriarchy, but at the very same time, we have to work hard not to suppress the voices of our comrades in arms in Europe and elsewhere. So it's a very kind of strange position that Black American feminists find themselves in. But then also, as Domi says, that because there is a far more open but still deeply problematic conversation about race in the US, is that when Dominique goes to the US to talk about this, people are like, Afro-Deutsch? What? Was? So I'm so sorry. Anyway, and so you get all this attention because it's like, wow, we want to understand the variations of the racial hierarchy, the variations of Blackness, not just in the United States, but elsewhere. And it's wild, but not so wild if you understand the nature of white supremacy, that of course you don't have these kinds of conversations in Germany and elsewhere. Yeah. So, and in terms of being published by ReReclaim, I understand why they did it, right? Because, you know, they're known for kind of publishing the canon, and my book is about writing against and struggling against the canon, and so there's a little frisson for them about then publishing me, right? And so, but I think that's right. When I think about, you know, some of the great anthologized texts, we have Showing Our Colors, right? Is kind of the main book that's often out of print, hard to find, but this is the foundational book for Afro-Deutsch feminism that is difficult to find, right?
I'm just going to say the German title, Farbe bekennen.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you haven't read it, you have to read it.
You must read it.
Absolute classical text.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's a great crime that it's a lot of Black American scholars who helped bring this back into being, right? Tiffany Flovell, who is one of the kind of key scholars on the Afro-Deutsch experience, gets a lot of attention, oftentimes because she's not submissive to the German publishing regime, and because she's a Black American, people expect her to be interested in these kinds of things. Yeah. So it's a very complicated space.
It comes at the expense of quite a lot. But, you know, America had a prominent civil rights movement, and it's continuing on, and I think this also, which I find has not necessarily happened yet in Germany, you know? But yeah, this I think also that the responsibility should be bared on the publishing houses. That's my opinion. Moving on, I would like to discuss the role of nonfiction and fiction for both of you. So what significance does reading fiction have for your theoretical work? Very straightforward questions.
Yeah, so I also have to clarify, I'm actually not acting editor-in-chief at Missy. I haven't been active in the editing as an editor for 3 years because I'm on a sabbatical, writing sabbatical. I'm writing a book. Which is actually a hybrid between fiction and nonfiction, and it's like it's a colonial history. It kind of looks at my white German family's colonial history as well as my Afro-Caribbean father's side, it's called The White Rasta. It might be out 26, I'm hoping, but in a way, it's actually about whiteness more than blackness, and it's looking at whiteness from a Black perspective. I find myself reading a lot of books at the moment that kind of speak to the experience or the formation of white womanhood against the backdrop of blackness, or the way that like white womanhood is kind of needs blackness in order to kind of constitute itself, especially in a colonial German context. Well, I'm writing a book about the German colonial context, but the books I'm reading, for example, Doris Lessing, The Grass is Singing, is super, super interesting on that. I'm also like rereading Jean Rhys, White Sagacity, which is like super close to my heart because Jean Rhys is from Dominica, so is my dad. But you know, she was a white creolized writer, and I find it so interesting that a lot of people she's canonized a lot. It's like a very classic text, a post-colonial rewriting of Jane Eyre. And oftentimes she's kind of grouped in as a black or a POC writer. Like I see her listed in that, and then or she's like, because she was like born in the Caribbean, but obviously she was white, and she does talk about white womanhood against the backdrop of slavery and blackness, and I do feel that there is not really much sensibility for that. So this is something I'm really interested in fiction at the moment. Yeah.
Akwugo?
So for me, as a boring academic, I always kind of weirdly fetishize fiction because it's not something I was trained in and trained how to read it, but not how to write it. And so, and I always say that I don't read a lot of nonfiction for leisure because it's like I read nonfiction for work all the time. And so I'm always like escaping into fiction. But, and because what fiction offers me, because you know, in academic writing, there are all these rules, a way you build an argument, how you present things, and it's actually very constricting. And what fiction does, it gives you this a different idea of form, structure, and storytelling, which I've tried to experiment with a little bit with Fugitive Feminism, but that was a deeply uncomfortable process for me. Because trying to break out of the strictures of the conventions of academic writing. And I remember my starting point was The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, his great Pulitzer Prize winning novel, as the starting point, because I found that structure of storytelling, the alternative history of the United States, the deep ambivalence of the protagonist Cora, all of that was, I remember reading that book and I couldn't stop thinking about it, and then it kind of bled in. It's so good, oh my God, it's so good. You have to read this book if you haven't read it. Anyway, so such a fangirl. Anyway, and I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I realized that's when the idea of fugitive feminism was born.
I love that it informed your book. Okay, we're gonna get into a tougher topic now. I find this panel significant in many ways, and one of them is in relation to the Black boycott of this fair in 2022, which illustrates to me, among many things, the lack of intersectionality on topics of equality, diversity, and free speech, which in turn erases these very topics by drowning them in a white patriarchal hegemony and perspective. Because there's this erasure of intersectionality, the idea of free speech becomes one size fits all. And because there's no diversity in these institutional boards, the rights and needs of people from multi-ethnic backgrounds and experience become erased. What do you think the role of Black feminist literature has in rectifying such problematic excuses for free speech? And how can books teach us to redefine what free speech is for the inclusion of everyone and not only the dominant canon?
Thanks for making me go first with this hard question. Okay. As I get older, I guess I am less interested in trying to rectify spaces because we're all too old to know that this is a problem. Do you know what I mean? It's like I refuse to be this person who comes to say, where are the Black people? Where are the Turkish people? You already know that they're not here. And I refuse to be this person to continually remind you. I will, and as a result, be your whipping boy. I refuse to do that. And so, like, what Black feminism and Black feminist literature teaches me is about creating one's own space. You know, Toni Morrison's, her credo was about writing about the Black experience. And when you read her books, white folks are off in the distance, creating problems, but they are not the, but they are absolutely not the center of her world and of her universe. And when you read the early reviews of Morrison's work in the 1970s, the book reviewers, especially in the New York Times, said, she's so talented. Why is she wasting her talents writing about Black people? Like, I urge you to read her early reviews. It reveals something very important. And so you know, Toni Morrison is never wrong. And so when she says that when she says her focus is about building a world and spaces for, by, and for Black people, that's good enough for me. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm grateful that you said that, because I too feel that what draws me to Black feminism is this stance of refusal, of hopeful refusal, and that means, yeah, like it means not exhausting ourselves in these battles. I mean, and already the boycott in 21 was like, obviously it was it was part of a long chain of complaints, you know, and nothing will change. It's like, why, at some point, you know, why should you exhaust yourself in those futile battles where you could actually put your energy into creating alternative spaces? And that is what draws me to Black feminism. And for example, the alternative book fair that was created is one of these spaces that can, like, others, and it's being done. I mean, the most interesting things in German literature that are happening, in my opinion, and I mean, I live in a little bit of a Berlin bubble, but they're alternative, you know, it's being done, it's all there. It's exciting, it's new, and it really doesn't necessarily need those, you know, huge commercial mainstream platforms that do not want us, really, or that we have to, like, always appeal to and have to, like, prove that we're smart, or, you know, even prove our humanity in a way, and that is really, who has time for that? So, yeah, I think the interesting things are born in the rubble or are thriving in the cracks, in the nooks, in the undercommons, and that is where my energy is going. I know that, so, but, yeah.
I agree with you. I think the future is in these alternative spaces, in independent publishing, where they have a lot more openness to diverse voices. Thank you for that. Storytelling. Does somebody want to clap? You can go ahead, please. So storytelling is incredibly important to understanding who we are as humans, what we want to pass on, how we see the world. If you had a chance to curate books for children's education, I was going to ask you to give me a book that every child needs to read from kindergarten up until high school. That might be too much, but maybe you can pick one or two books that are essential to the education of every child.
So I have 2 kids, so it makes it, like, super embarrassing. I cannot think of one. I mean, because I would just, like, variety, you know, just, like, read everything you can. It's so subjective. I mean, the kind of images and words that you latch on, that's what makes you, you know, and you just have to be subjected to as much variety as possible. And obviously, you know, it would be good to have, like, you know, what they call diversity now in children's books, so that, you know, yeah, I mean, for obvious reasons. But you know, at the same time, if we're talking about, like, really young ages, I don't know, am I going to go for the German canon, or which is, no? Let me say, like, Goodnight Moon. We talk about Goodnight Moon. I think, you know, as a classic. But again, I'm only thinking about English-speaking children's books. It's still difficult, especially for, like, really, like, kindergarten ages, to find good German books. Snowy Day again. There's a lovely children's book called, I think it's called Alfio. It's like the story. It's like a young Black girl who loses her pet turtle. And then the second part of it is told from the perspective of the turtle, and the turtle did not, like, is looking for her or something. It's just very cute, and it's like you have different perspectives. human-animal relations. It's great. I can recommend. But then there's so much out, so much published each year, and it is getting better, so it will change.
So I don't have children, young children in my life. I'm clearly a terrible aunt. I've never really thought about this so much. I don't know. Things like the Caldecott winner, A Snowy Day is classic of a book of a product of the American Civil Rights Movement, which I think everyone should read because it's beautiful art. It's a work of art alongside great storytelling. In terms of other books, I don't know. I was out here reading The Great Gatsby at 15 and being moved by the tragic story. So I'm really the worst person to ask this because I was I see myself in Gatsby. Oh, so I'm really bad for that. So I'm bad for this.
I asked this question because I also have 2 kids, and I saw the extreme lack in German children's books. So I started curating at a very early age for my children, and mostly in English. And what I've learned is it's an education. You really have to sit there and read for them and explain things. At least that's what I did. I encourage everybody else to do that. It is really work to do this, and also trust your children early on to be honest and truthful. For them, fiction and nonfiction, there's no difference when they're very young, and that's what I found in my journey as a budging curator of children's books. That's why kids were small. So we're.
Can I just one thing that I actually noticed, which is it's a very personal story, but I think it was important. So at some point, my daughter, who's is very light skinned too, and who went to a very white German Kinderladen, which tend to be very white and bougie anyway, compared to others in Berlin. And at some point we were reading a book which was called Amazing Grace, it's an amazing book. It's very beautiful with a black protagonist. And at some point she said she didn't like that girl, and she thought her ugly. And that was that moment. It was dum dum, what is happening? And I'd noticed that there were groups of girls in her kindergarten who were doing that whole princess thing and kind of glorifying long blonde hair. And I kind of knew where it came from, but I hadn't actively worked towards anything with her. I mean, at that point, she was 4 or something. And then what happened is I panicked. I got loads of books. I actually got the anti-racist baby book or something. I know, it's not ideal, but it really worked. This idea of the ladder. Children understand racism very quickly. I mean, children have a innate sense of justice, and it clicked super. Is and now she's I think we went a little bit too far. When she draws herself, she draws herself very, very, very dark skinned, which is at some point we might have to adjust that. And she's always drawn only to black kids in books and everything. But I'm happy it worked, to be honest, because I was scared at that point. I was what's going on?
Yeah, I guess maybe because I was already a minority in this country, I was already very mindful in a way of my boys are also very fair. At least one of them is very fair. And I knew that I had to educate them early on. And from my journey, I found out, kids can handle the truth. And you should all educate your children, not just us as black people or minorities. We have about 10 minutes left, but I'm going to give this chance because I know you wanted to talk, Akwugo, about the writing process. Between the two of you's differing writing processes, everyone has something different, and would like to know, what is your writing process? We can start with you, Dominique. Apart from fiction informing your nonfiction.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask this question because as a boring academic, I'm always amazed by creative writers and true artists. And when we had a little pre-conversation about this, Domi's oh, you're suffering from imposter syndrome. And I was no, I just know I'm not creative. It's fine. I've come to terms with that. But it's that's not really that's not what this is. It's more of I don't have people who live in my head. I don't have this, I have a vivid imagination, but you know how people like insist on, writers say, I have to get this story out, I have to get this protagonist on the page. I'm amazed by that, and I think it's incredible because that's certainly not how I organize my writing. I'm thinking about a problem, thinking about the research question, evidencing that, and then throwing a little bit of razzle-dazzle for the crowd and stuff. But that's about it. It's actually quite mechanical in many ways. And so this is why I'm very interested in what you're doing, especially because you move between fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah, it is very interesting in my book. So, I'm writing it, I started writing it on the back of my PhD, which was, academic writing, even though, yeah, it was just something that really, I studied literature because literature excited me. I could have not probably had that same level of engagement and kind of also pleasure in writing in social sciences or something. So my book, however, it is very different. It's decidedly not academic writing, but it has a memoir part, it has a nonfiction part and a straight up fictionalized part. So I can actually compare all different modes of writing. One thing I think, and I really have to disagree because I loved the personal aspects in your book. I loved the prose. I found that there was a rhythm to it, there was a literariness to it. I often kind of struggle at the idea, so I guess in the US or in Anglophone publishing, there is an idea of literary nonfiction that is not really penetrated in German, right? In German you have a thing book, right? A Sachbuch, or you have Belletristik. And it's the division is weird. So I'm really working in and pushing against that and working within something that I find literary, but it is nonfiction. And I do really enjoy that. And I find it it's a space of discovery in that sense. Whereas when I write something that's more plot-driven, or the parts that I like plot-driven, that are story-driven, that are really immersive in a world, it's just surprisingly fun. There's a lot of pleasure. There's just huge, and there's also a sense of discovery in terms of, wow, I don't know, there's I'm learning things that are then later confirmed. Because I'm working with letters, I'm actually fictionalizing actual historical letters. And there is a way that protagonists kind of take on a life and tell you something about themselves that is then later confirmed, which is super magical. I love it. But I really would not want to value that in any way higher than the exploration and discovery that I have in more philosophical non-fictional writing, which I see you doing. So
yeah, I agree with you. Your book is amazing, and I think just get out of the labels, I do creative nonfiction, that's how I label myself, but I think the point is these labels are given to us, right, in the industry, and you don't have to write in that way, just be free enough to write how you want, Therapy session. So I'd like to close with this question. In panels I moderate, I always ask this question, and I find the answer is always interesting. If you're not a writer, what would you be doing?
Oh, I know. I love, because this is the best question in the pub. So especially to kind of warm, especially if people don't know each other very well. It's two things. I would be running a bookshop. Oh, how boring. So I would, but also a plant shop as well, because everyone knows I love plants. I have friends in the audience who were in my flat back in Scotland, and they were oh my God, because they felt slightly overwhelmed because they were living with all of my gigantic plants. So I would have a plant bookshop. Yes, they're here. So, so that's what I would do, and I would then it would be the problem of dealing with the humidity and the books, and so but I want to have that problem.
You really thought it through. You really thought it through. I like it. Plan and books. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, very hard for me to imagine a world where I'm not writing in some form or fashion. It's just something I've always done, always been driven towards. It's definitely part of me, but I do like fermenting. And I could see myself. Yeah, I do kick-ass kimchi. I'm very good with the gherkin. What is it called? The pickles.
Can you make cider, or is that?
Yeah, do kombucha, but Cider.
no,
Yeah, I
sorry.
do vinegars. Anyway, fermenting is fun. I could, if I'd had to only ferment, I guess I could do that.
Takes out the fun. Amazing. I love it. Writers fermenting. I mean, goes together. Thank you, Akwugo and Dominique, for sharing your insights with us today. I was very moved by our discussion, and obviously the audience was as well. We've explored the powerful roles of fiction and nonfiction play in shaping Black feminist theory and in driving conversations about social change. Literature in its many forms continues to be a vital force in challenging structures of inequality and advancing feminist thought, which is not something just for women, but essential for everyone in our society. We need our stories to be told by us, curated by us, and shaped by us. With that, we have the German translation from ReReclaim Verlag of Akwugo's books, and we're giving away for free, right? So I urge you to get a copy. And you can come up front and to get this copy. I will end with a quote by Audre Lorde, which encapsulates how storytelling has been central to the survival, empowerment of marginalized communities, enabling them to share wisdom, resist oppression, and preserve their identities. Stories are not told for the telling, but for the breath of life they preserve. We have always passed on our wisdom through stories. We have always known that it is our words that will break our chains in time. Thank you.